Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of the 4C Marketplace podcast. I'm your host, Uzkar Ibrahim, and today we have Steve Probst. Steve Probst is the CEO of 4C Marketplace, and Steve is here today to discuss the purpose of this podcast project and what we hope to achieve from it. Without further ado, Steve, if you want to take things from here, why this podcast and why do we want to do this project? What do we hope to get out of from it?
There are a great many companies exhibit and participate in the 4C conference. There's a tremendous number of technologies that they have. The 4C platform offers a way to collaborate amongst the exhibitors and sponsors and with the industry attendees. These exhibitors have best management practices to share, and what we're trying to elicit from each of these participants is the compelling message for their company.
Right.
Why someone from industry would use their company, their company's best management practices, their company's technologies.
Right.
So we're trying in a compelling message, but to do so in a conversational format that easily and quickly and conveys the information in a way that the customers understand.
Right. So essentially what you're saying is that we're here to help. We're here to create a place where everyone can help describe what their compelling message is, as well as create an environment where we can all get our heads together and come up with the best management practices and technologies and understand their impact, as well as understand how they fit within the context of the current industry. Correct?
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah. So the compelling message for a company is if you think you get in an elevator with a customer and you've got 3 minutes or less. What do you say to that customer? And every company should have that compelling message at their fingertips. And the compelling message should really get to why.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that customer want and need the product, service, technology, best management practice that they have to offer?
Right.
And the conference is a format for them to translate that compelling message and to also share more detailed information in a collaborative environment, either in the form of a presentation
Mm-hmm.
or in the form of training classes. And then again, just through conversation with the customers at the conference. Conference is something different than most other conferences in that we sponsor evening events. So from 5:30 at night till 11 at night, there's a couple hundred customers, a couple hundred plus customers.
Right.
And these exhibitors get a chance to have those conversations, to collaborate, to get into detail, to describe why they exist, to talk about their culture of their organization, and specifically in terms of daily behavior. The daily behavior of an organization is your culture. Your brand is a mirror image of that culture.
Mm-hmm.
So your brand is how the company views you.
Right.
And the brand is how the world views you. And they're going to view you based off your daily behavior and your ability to communicate a compelling message.
Right.
So that's part of what this blog is about. The blog is about getting folks to formulate that compelling message, to communicate it,
Right.
and to share their culture, their values, who they are, why they exist, what they do, and what they have to offer to the refinery, chemical, oil and gas, and manufacturing facilities throughout the United States.
Got it. So I guess two questions here. Number one, with your experience in the environmental compliance sector, do you feel that this mission is important because companies don't do it well, or what is driving why we want to help companies within this sector do that? And then number two, what is 4C Marketplace's compelling message?
Yeah, so the why is companies spend a certain dollar amount on compliance. The more effective they are at spending those dollars, the greater compliance they get.
Right.
These service companies and these technology companies, the more effective their compelling message, the greater benefit there is to industry.
Right.
We also want to understand why the customers use their product so that we can help bring those products to the international market.
Right.
If we understand the benefit that they provide to the customer, then we can take that product to China and other countries, especially China, where they have a great need
Right.
for air pollution control and improvement of air quality. But also here in the United States, every company wants to achieve compliance. Every company wants to reduce emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And if over the last 10 years, this will be our 8th 4C conference, there's a tremendous reduction in emissions and across the United States. And that is largely in part because of all of the great technology and great best management practice and the collaborative environment that we have here at the 4C conference.
Right. And with that, since you've hosted the 4C conference for about 8 years now, what stands out to you as an interesting insight or perspective that you've gained since hosting it?
Yes. On the leak detection and repair market, which is primarily Method 21 in the past, the technologies to prevent fugitive emissions from occurring in the first place, better packings, better gaskets, better industrial bolting, all of those technologies have really come to the forefront and are now being implemented on a regular basis. So the LDAR market has changed from purely a find and fix to a more preventative approach. And this leads to operational excellence. The fewer valves you have to take out of service to repair, the fewer flange leaks means fewer fires. There's an operational benefit, operational excellence. There's a safety benefit. And that will continue into the future as optical gas imaging with cameras and drones eliminate scaffolding and the need for scaffolding. They reduce the number of falls, slips, and injuries related to monitoring elevated structures.
Right.
The combination of optical gas imaging, it's a combination of better packings, better gaskets, better industrial bolting techniques, all reducing emissions, reducing the need for a frequency of Method 21 monitoring, improving the overall emission structure by reducing emissions and improving operational excellence through fewer emissions from the beginning.
Right. So what you're essentially saying is that if you design it correctly up front, that there's less need for monitoring events further down the line in the future, or in essence, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Correct. And the same is true with flares in the past. A lot of the emphasis on flare operation was on getting sufficient steam and supplemental fuel gas. Moving forward, things like the Midas meter that can see leaks from valves into the flare system Once you reduce the amount of flow to the flare, you're saving money. Again, there's an operational excellence benefit and fewer emissions.
Right.
Also, with the monitoring of the flare, monitoring of the flow, the better information you have about the composition and the flow and the timing of the composition and the flow, the better root cause analysis you'll be able to perform to prevent the flow from occurring in the future. Certain products like GE's Flare IQ can also reduce the amount of supplemental fuel and the amount of steam. So again, there's a cost savings, there's an operational excellence, there's a higher destruction efficiency because you have the right amount of supplemental fuel, the right amount of steam to produce a flame that's at the incipient point where you have the maximum destruction efficiency a greater and greater and greater percentage of the time.
Right. So I guess if we were to kind of lay out the purpose of the 4C conference and marketplace in a Venn diagram, there's this interesting cross-section that we're trying to hit, which is environmental compliance along with operational excellence, right? So merging those two, finding technologies which really merges the gap between the two to knock out two birds with one stone, if you will.
Correct. If you went to a Venn diagram, it's the intersection of the best technology and the best management practices. When you're operating with the union of those two, you achieve operational excellence, you achieve fewer emissions, you achieve lower cost, all of the things that really the conference is about.
Right.
Higher compliance, lower cost, lower emissions, higher operational excellence. And that's all comes about through the collaborative environment. And this blog is an excellent example of that, where people articulate the compelling message of their company. They articulate the best management practices. They articulate the technology. They articulate how those best management practices and technologies lead to higher compliance, lower cost, greater operational excellence.
Right. So with that, tying that back into the initial statement that you made, not just identifying all these, but creating a change in operational culture to find all these and apply the best technologies and best management practices, but also to impact the performance of an organization and have a tangible result of that being better performance through this change of culture, essentially.
Correct. The companies that participate, the industrial companies, the refineries, chemical plants, oil and gas, manufacturing facilities, the people that attend the conference, they're there. They've chosen to come to the conference because they share in our common belief. They share in the belief of always improving best management practices.
Right.
Adopting the latest technologies, achieving the highest possible level of compliance, achieving operational excellence. They get it. They understand it. They have a culture that's reflective of the culture of the conference.
Absolutely. And with that, kind of, you, by virtue of hosting this conference and having all of these industry attendees and vendors and companies and technology companies and service companies coming in to do presentations, what do you think is the one thing that's going to have the biggest impact on the industry, the way that we do business over there, let's say the next 5 to 10 years?
I believe it's really the rate of adoption of technologies and best management practices.
Right.
The technologies, some of the technologies, for example, like optical gas imaging. Optical gas imaging has been around for over 10 years, but yet the bulk of the adoption has occurred in the last few years.
Right.
The current administration is more prone to adopt those technologies which drive efficiency, which drive lower cost, which drive lower emissions, which drive operational excellence. I believe once that takes hold and the culture of the environmental regulatory world, not just the regulated industry and not just the service providers,
Right.
the regulators also get on board with the idea of adopting best management practices fast,
Right.
adopt technologies faster, that regulatory impediments are currently one of the largest impediments to technology adoption, to best management practice adoption. And once those regulatory barriers come down, we will be able to see and adopt a culture across the entire spectrum of regulators, regulated, and the service providers and technology providers. All of those together will see a faster and faster rate of change.
And you brought up an interesting point because from the regulatory perspective, where do you see that impediment? What drives that impediment to adopting new technologies? Is it just a different dichotomy of operations? Do they work off of more of a risk management type of decision-making process? Do you think regulators aren't necessarily in line or understanding of the latest technology, or what do you think drives that gap of understanding between all these different stakeholders, and how do you think we could address it in a manner that can fix that?
Yeah. So in the past, regulations were developed in a regulatory negotiation, what they call reg-neg environment, that was primarily a political environment.
Right.
Moving forward, the hope is that it involves more of a science-based approach and more of a results or outcome-based approach versus a command and control approach or a focus on the intensity of record keeping and reporting. We do all of this to reduce emissions,
Right,
achieve operational excellence, and to put that goal back in the forefront as opposed to a sort of a gotcha mentality.
right,
I believe when we get focused on the results, get focused on lower cost, lower emissions, better outcomes, and that is the change that we see. And that is the change, I believe, that will be apparent at the 4C conference this year, April 3rd to the 5th in San Antonio, Texas.
right. And with that, now, where do you see the 4C conference and marketplace going over the next 5 to 10 years based off of your observations of where the market is moving?
The number of attendees internationally at 4C grows every year, and the participation of the regulators also grows every year. And the combination of those leads to a greater collaboration, an environment of change. And that's exciting for the conference to see that continue to develop over the coming 3 to 5 years.
Right. So not just cultural change brought about by bringing all these stakeholders together and collaborating within only the U.S., but you're saying the impact that it could have worldwide is very, very exciting.
Absolutely. We've already experienced that in China. At the very first 4C conference, an individual from China attended. That led to us participating with some of the Chinese regulatory agencies, the development of an LDAR rule. That deadline was December 31st of 2017. So millions of dollars worth of fugitive emissions monitoring equipment has been sold in China, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of tons of emissions have been reduced in China as a result of that collaboration and driving towards that goal.
Right. You really see 4C being at the forefront of every single environmental rule change and technology implementation worldwide.
Yes, the flares, China right now has not yet focused on flares. At the conference, there's an entire Flare for Experts training class showcasing each of the technologies that can be used to measure flare flow and flare composition.
Right.
The Chinese distributors of the leak detection and repair equipment will be at the conference. They'll be exposed to that same technology and best management practices that they were exposed to for LDAR. They'll now be exposed to for flares. In addition, we participate in conferences in China and promote those technologies there also.
Perfect. And with that, I think we really wrap things up. Where's the best place to find both you and the conference and any information related to the events and presentations?
You can go to 4cconference.com website. There's the presentations and the training classes are available there. And you can go to my LinkedIn page to see the 60, or really 90 plus presentations and 30 training classes.
Perfect. We'll look out for you on LinkedIn, and we'll make sure that everyone has access to the website. Both Steve's profile and the website will be located at the show notes of this podcast.